Welcome to the Butter Notes podcast with three guys who have no business listening to music, much less talking about it. All right, welcome back to the Butter Notes podcast. This is your co-host Jim here. I'm here with Jake and Tone, and we're going to talk about the psychedelic era of Porcupine Tree today. The first 5 albums plus an EP. Start out here with On the Sunday of Life, which is actually so this is technically a compilation of 2 shorter albums that like 2 shorter like cassette collections, I think, right?
Yes.
That had been put together by Steven Wilson in the 80s.
Yeah, and then Delirium, the record company, picks them up and then re-releases this, and they shift around all the tracks, I think. But I don't think every song from Tarquin Seaweed Farm and the one about advice to golfers, I can't even remember the name. I don't think every song from those 2 made it, but a lot of them did. And so this is a pretty long release and non-unified release for a debut on a major, semi-major label. I don't know how big of a label Delirium was at the time, but still a pretty interesting debut, record label debut, I think.
I'm sorry, who are you? Who am I listening to?
My name is.
We're going to do this every time.
My name is Intermediate Jesus.
Who the fuck
No, that's
are
my
you?
name,
Oh,
idiot.
say your name.
Everyone's wired.
My name is Mediate Jesus.
Pull a goddamn.
This is Jake. This is Jake here. Intermediate
Dental
Jesus, also
surgery
known
with
as.
this motherfucker.
People know who. If people are watching these, they'll know who it is. They'll know.
No one's listening to this, and they definitely don't know who you are.
As soon as they hear it, they'll say, "Oh, that's Jake." They'll know.
No, they won't.
I'm just one of those people. Yeah, it's fine.
Alright, yeah, this is
Who
Code
you didn't even
talking.
say your name. You're sitting here talking with who are you?
Holy shit, this guy is unbelievable. Yeah, On the Sunday of Life is basically like young Steven Wilson fucking around on a tape recorder. And that's what it sounds like. But considering that's what it is, it's pretty fucking impressive.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's my least favorite of the bunch, but some of the moments on here are really, really great.
9 Cats is one of his best songs in his whole career, I think. I think it's a genius song. Radioactive Toy is also amazing.
I do like Radioactive Toy. What's the 3rd track? I think it's called Third Eye Surfer.
Third Eye Surfer is great. Trippy.
Yeah, Third Eye Surfer is
that
fucking
little keyboard
beautiful.
he's doing on there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like 60s Zappa-esque moments on this thing. Like some of the weirder like tape manipulation stuff that you hear is reminiscent of so much of that late 60s psychedelia.
Yeah, there's a lot of great. I don't know if it's comedy, but for the lack of a better word, there's a lot of comedy on early Porcupine Tree that just like utterly vanishes from Steven Wilson's material after a certain point.
Yeah, I mean like Jupiter
Island.
Jupiter Island.
Yeah,
I love
Jupiter
that song.
Island. There's
What
just like
is the
wackiness
deal
to it.
with that snare on Jupiter Island, though? That shit makes my head hurt. That is the worst.
I don't think it's.
Dude, there's so much bad drum sounds on the Sunday.
I don't think
of
it's
Life.
the snare, is it? It's the cymbal. It's like tinny, right? The snare sounds okay. It sounds.
I think it could. Yeah. The fact that we're debating what it is.
The fact that you can't tell it says something. Yeah.
Well, I just want to be clear about it.
I know exactly the sound you're talking about, but now that there's a debate, I can't tell.
Exactly. It sounds like shit.
It's that tinny cymbal. I'm pretty sure. But yes, it doesn't sound.
I just listened to this album again like 2 hours ago, and I put it on, got through that first track, and then. Bam! Right in on what's the fucking
Jupiter
song
Island.
What? Yeah, Jupiter Island. Right in on Jupiter Island. These fucking drums just shattered my eardrums. It's not good. It hurt.
It's so unlike the drum sound on a lot of the other. That song is just so unlike a lot of the other songs that succeeded on the album. I think I mean, to me, it shows that it's definitely a compilation, and that is something I try to keep in mind when I'm listening to this, and I get a lot more enjoyment out of it. That this was a something of an artificially done track list, and I think that makes it better to just try to enjoy the songs as they are. I will say one thing that I think brings it down as well. Those like short, like early, like first 2 Soft Machine-esque interludes are like 20 seconds long or whatever. If I were listening to it as an album, I would say, I think that just breaks up the pacing of the album. I don't really know what they're doing here, but just as kind of like little audio samples, they're kind of interesting. But That's something I think that brings it down. And then, of course, the recording quality is not great, and I can still see some immaturity coming from Swilson at this stage, but he's also obviously got a knack for songwriting. Aside from that terrible sound, I think Jupiter Island's a really fun song. It's really catchy. It's fun to sing.
I agree, but that drum sound does kind of fuck it up. And I can normally overlook like little things like that in music, but that drum sound is too shitty on Jupiter Island for me to ignore. But it is a good song. Otherwise, I agree. It's catchy. The chorus is fun.
You know, it's funny. I actually didn't notice how bad it was until you mentioned it. Like, I'm sure I heard it and was like, yeah, but it didn't bother me until. So thanks for ruining that for me. I never
Does
really.
It actually
I never
bother
really
you now?
I mean, I can't help but notice it now. It's one of those things you've pointed out. I just figured it was early Porcupine Tree, so I don't think about production like that. I always put context. And I'm like, this was one dude on this early release. No one knew who he was. He's not a drummer. Like, whatever. I don't know. I just didn't. Wasn't what I was thinking. I was like, holy shit, this is a weird psych pop song. So I didn't think about it, but now you pointed it out. I'll forever have that association. So thanks for that. But I think more jarring is Linton Samuel Dawson near the end, where those vocals keep building.
I thought that
Oh my
The
god,
chipmunk. I could do without the chipmunk.
Yeah.
I don't much care for it. I could very much
unnerving.
do without it.
That might be my
totally
least
agree.
favorite song in the entire discography. I would say.
Me
That's
too.
possibly my least favorite song in the entire discography.
I think at Nostalgia Factory he does that Chipmunks thing too.
Yeah, but that song is
Isn't it
much
Nostalgia
more.
Factory.
Yeah, that song is much more bearable though.
It's not my.
It just like builds and it gives me this really like kind of cringe energy feel. I don't know. It's not great. That song is not great.
So one thing that's interesting, and this is more forward looking, but like Voyage 34 and Up the Downstair are just lysergically soaked, whereas this stuff is more like the psychedelic element is a little bit more in the background. You definitely hear it. Like there's just little weird moments like space transmission.
That track is very weird. It's ASMR.
Yeah. A lot of the tape manipulation, some of the keyboard sounds on Third Eye Surfer for sure, but it's not as like outwardly psychedelic as Voyage 34 and Up the Downstair.
They're not as spacey, but yeah.
You're getting some like more subtle takes on psychedelia, like on Nine Cats, which is basically psychedelic folk, but isn't like crazy black hole cosmic psychedelia in the way that you get on Up the Downstair and Voyage 34 in the Sky.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, like it's like what this album is what it sounds like. And we've already talked about what it is. But I mean, there are some major highlights on this thing, and I always like it. There are moments that I tune out of, but then there are other tracks that like floor me. And that's just due to the nature of what this record is. So I also keep that context in mind when I evaluate it.
Yeah, that's pretty much my exact take on this album.
I'm definitely agreeing with Nine Cats and Radioactive Toy. I think are some of the best in the entire discography. And we see nuggets of that like skillful composition and songwriting we get on later albums. And Radioactive Toy, the way it's structured, is just so it's I don't know. To me, it just foreshadows a lot of what he's doing in the like in absentia and post in absentia years. So you get that like that kind of like somber, like creepy kind of organ in the background, and then there's like the harmonies, the brooding, melancholic vocals, and then there's like a kind of a pushing rhythmic guitar part. He kind of sets the template for a lot of the more like pushing towards prog metal sound later in the discography. And so I think it's something I really like about these albums is I think it's just Steven Wilson messing around and trying to figure stuff out and what works. And in some ways it's endearing and kind of cool to see. It just wasn't restricted. And in a lot of ways, I think as he's done all across his career, as Anthony, you pointed out earlier in the week, like he pays homage to his influences in a lot of ways and just kind of like tries to elaborate on those ideas, which I think is really cool. And another thing I think is cool the way he approaches this album is, to me, at least on this album and maybe on some of the other ones, and just knowing like how some of those albums are composed, to me in some ways it seems like Steven Wilson is like first and foremost a composer and a producer than he is a musician. Like he can play the instruments and do the parts, but he's kind of more like I feel like he's got an artistic vision and he knows how to make arrange all the sounds to make them work really well. And then he can play the parts, he lays down some really cool bass lines and guitar parts and things like that. But I don't think that was like that's ever been his calling to me. He's always been kind of like, I've always seen him as a producer and composer first.
He's a band leader, definitely.
Yeah.
He's not like some virtuoso instrumentalist. That's not where his strengths lie.
Right.
And Porcupine Tree is not a band at this point, and really doesn't become one until Signify. So that's another important thing to keep in mind with these early albums. They're basically solo albums.
It's all him, I'm pretty sure. I mean, he may have some people feature, and I know that like the lyrics were written by one of his friends in high school or something, and the main guy at Delirium Records helped out in here and there. But yeah, not until Signify where they like solidify the band unit, and on the main tracks on the Sky Moves Sidways, there's really no band element to any of this. At least not for the writing of the music. It's pretty much all him. It's just like a pseudonym for Steven Wilson, really.
If I'm not wrong, the debut from No Man predates this album. I think that might be the first professional release from Steven, is the debut from No Man, which I'm blanking on what it's called. It's called like, what's it called? Like, what's it called?
I'm looking it up now.
It's a really good album, and I'm pretty sure it's like from 1990. I always get really surprised when I see how early that first No Man album is.
Is it Love Blows and Love Cries?
Love Blows and Love Cries. 93.
That's 93. Sunday of Life.
If it doesn't predate it, it's I don't know. I guess we can go down to the month if we want to. This stuff might be a little bit earlier, but it's basically around the same time both of those albums were made, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, a lot of these tracks are like repurposed No Man, like later on the discography too. Like a lot. I mean, he's just writing an insane amount of music and just using it and reusing it for all of his projects, which I think is really interesting as well.
All right, well, let's move on to number 2 here. We got Voyage 34, which is an EP, kind of?
It's really just a song.
Well,
yeah.
The complete trip is what we're talking about, right? There are a lot of different versions of this, so the complete trip is what...
Yeah.
Which isn't the album cover we have here, but it doesn't really matter that much. The complete trip is 4 tracks and is about an hour, about 70 minutes long.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But tracks 3 and 4 are just remixes, right? So like the first 2 tracks are Voyage 34 proper. Like the first, it's like a 30-minute. I think Steven called it an anti-single or something like that, and it was just supposed to be 1 track, and it was supposed to be featured on Up the Downstair, and then they released this separately. And then the third and 4th track, one is like, I think it's called like Australasia something. I can't remember the subtitle, but the British electronic group remixed it, and then Steve Wilson remixed part of it for the fourth track.
Well, the complete trip, the 4-track version, definitely sounds like a full piece. It doesn't sound like one piece and then remixes. That might have been how it's constructed, but it definitely, when it sounds like a full piece, not just like a track and then remixes. I think that's correct, that's what it is, but it's definitely presented as if it's one coherent thing. And
yeah, it definitely works like that.
It does it gets more trance. The last 2 tracks of the complete trip are definitely more trance, which I really like it when Steven goes in that direction, which he always has. Like we talked about No Man, when him and Tim, like that's honestly like his heritage more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Is like psychedelic and trance music. And this is by far the most, like, his deepest dive into that.
Yeah, I had never heard this before about a week ago. And, it's so much like Up the Downstair. This and Up the Downstair are so similar.
They were going to be the same album, but he decided to split it.
Yeah.
I wonder about whether or not that was a good idea or not, because Up the Downstair I would probably like more if it had this on it. But
I agree.
It would also be insanely long if it had it on it. So I debate whether or not that was a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say they're interchangeable, because they're not interchangeable, but they're just very, very similar. Extended sort of trance pieces with samples about LSD, basically.
Well, it's a complete homage to Another Brick in the Wall, right? I mean, those riffs are...
Well, there's that one riff in, I think it's Phase 1, that's like...
It comes back in Phase 2.
It is just a Pink Floyd riff.
which is
all
cool.
This early Porcupine Tree is a massive homage to early Floyd. Like
Early
that's
Floyd,
the main influence on it.
And Tangerine Dream as well.
The riff I'm thinking of, and I think Jake is too. The riff I'm thinking of sounds like something off of The Wall.
Oh yeah, no, that riff
Yeah, it's
definitely
just
does.
this like heavy delay, chunky guitar lick.
Yeah, that's the wall.
Exactly.
I mean, that's another brick in the wall for sure. Which is not a problem. Like I said, he like you pointed out, Anthony wears his influences on his sleeve. Like he's not shy about that. I think that's always been something cool about Steven Wilson is that he can just compose a song in any style and make it sound really good. Not taking anything away from him in that respect, and it's enjoyable music to listen to.
Homie covers Taylor Swift.
What about Taylor Swift now?
That I haven't heard, and I don't
He
really
covers
want
Taylor
to.
Swift. You've heard this?
No,
Yes,
I
I have
know,
actually.
I know about
Yes.
it, obviously, but
You gotta hear it. You gotta hear it.
He plays it
You
on the
gotta
piano,
hear
I'm
it.
pretty sure, right?
Oh, you got.
Is that the
You
video?
gotta hear it. Yeah, it's a.
I have
That's
seen
interesting.
that. He can play any style he wants to. Not saying it's always good, but he could. I mean, he's confident in all of the styles he wants to play.
He can certainly try, and does.
He's competent in all those styles. It's not always great. Sometimes it misses the mark, but he's at least.
I don't think he's great as a pop star, man.
He's got some good moments.
No,
he's
not.
got some good moments as a pop star, I think. But it's not his.
The Steven Wilson that we're getting on this early stuff in the '90s almost seems like a different person. And like the musical
Seriously.
persona is like I did want to ask you, and I guess it's a good segue into it. How much continuity do you see between this early Porcupine Tree and later Porcupine Tree and later Steven Wilson? It like
very,
how
very
much
little.
I think
you see very little. I predict
Very
that
little.
Jake thinks that there's more.
yes,
Jim does.
you are correct. Yes. I mean,
Where do you see it? I kind of see some crossover between some moments on the Sunday of Life with stuff you see on Insurgentes. I don't know how you would pronounce it.
I think it's just
that
Insurgents.
So Insurgents and Grace for Drowning. I think there's a little bit of continuity there, but still not.
it's
very
there
much.
in parts of Fear of a Blank Planet. Like Anesthetized is a pretty big homage to Pink Floyd in a lot of ways. The Incident's definitely
But it's not
psychedelic.
psychedelic.
It's definitely rooted in psychedelic rock for sure. Like absolutely. All prog rock
I don't hear
rock
that at
is
all.
rooted in psychedelic rock in some way, but I think more so in this. I mean, they have all those like mystifying kind of airy ambient parts, like Gravity Eyelids on In Absentia. Pretty trippy.
I mean, he's doing No Man and Bass Communion well into the 2000s and 2010s, so there's continuity with that stuff, and he's doing that, so it's not like it disappears entirely. But I don't see much continuity with later Porcupine Tree and the solo albums.
I mean,
I
if
don't
you
see
look at
much.
it,
Yeah, I agree.
if you look at it in incremental steps, I definitely like. I don't think there's a huge departure from Signify or from the Sky Moves Sidways to Signify, and then from Signify to Stupid Dream. If you look at it incrementally, you can just see the influence kind of bleed into each other. I mean, yeah, it becomes heavier later, and later it goes in a different direction. I don't mean to say that In Absentia or Deadwing or psych rock, but I definitely think I don't think he just shucked off those influences and is doing something completely new on those albums.
It might be tone, not like musical tone, but like literary tone and emotional tone that shifts so much that makes the continuity hard to spot. Because like the emotional tone of the later Porcupine Tree is very different.
Yeah, it's brooding, melancholic, sad, rip your heart out kind of music. But I mean, listen to The Incident. It's all of that. I mean, that is a brutally emotional record, and it's still got that psychedelic quality to it. I think they actually kind of returned to that for we're getting a new album here this year, but what was their final album at the time before the hiatus? They actually kind of moved back in that direction, and I also see it a bit on Fear of a Blank Planet as well. I don't think it's like 1-to-1. It's not like, yeah, like I said, I don't think they're doing it's not like they're doing psych rock like straightforwardly on those albums, but the more I've listened to this stuff, the more I see the seeds of what they're doing in the later stuff in this, and that's kind of the way I approached it, rather than like moving it in the other direction. I can see some of like the heavier riffs, like there's a song on the actually I think it's the title track on the next album where I think it sounds kind of similar to them.
Yeah, so Up the Downstair, which we were just talking about, a lot of the same motifs, not identical, but similar themes coming on here. It's long, mostly instrumental pieces about LSD, basically.
How serious the drug-related content of these albums? I could do research into this if I wanted to, I'm sure, and get a real answer, but I'd rather just spitball. Like, how serious do you think of an homage to, like, the drug this stuff is, and how much of it is just, like, more of a aesthetic homage to the 60s?
I've been wondering that too, and I don't know. I mean, that's like a personal question for Steven Wilson, basically. Like, hey man, did you actually like to take acid all the time in the early to mid '90s? Or did you just like the idea of it?
But it's so different.
I mean, it's possible.
It's so different.
Lots of musicians like to take acid.
It's just like so insanely different from his persona now. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, I know.
But it could, like,
it is hard to imagine.
He very well could have loved to do acid when he was 20. So, like, it's people change. So I don't know. I could probably like try to look up an interview or something, but I don't really.
Yeah, I vaguely recall reading one here recently where it was him trying to play into an aesthetic from like the early 90s, where it was like this tail end of, like, I guess everything had moved into like rock had moved into the arena stuff. You had like thrash metal and all of this stuff, and I think he was trying to play into like the tail end of this psych rock genre. And I think a lot of the lyrics that were written for this music, he didn't write them. Like, he had someone else write them, or had suggestions from other people who were into psychedelics. So I mean, I don't know. Maybe, I mean, there are probably people that don't realize or wouldn't expect to have done psychedelics who have. So, I mean, he may well have done it. But I think it was more of an artistic thing. That would be my prediction.
That's the impression.
That would be my prediction, but I don't know.
That would be my
there was so much
opinion as well.
Yeah, same here. I mean, there was tons of that in the sort of cultural era then too, in the 90s. You know, in electronic music, there's a huge psychedelic component, which we know, which is Steven Wilson was obviously interested in at that time. So I think that's probably more likely. It also doesn't. I don't think it matters too much.
It doesn't. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the broader context of Wilson's career and the way it's changed. It's an interesting thing to wonder about.
And what's interesting about it is it's so forward. So much psychedelic music is sort of is more subtle about it, but he's just like, hey, here's a sample of this chick talking about LSD.
Yeah, like half the album features samples of people talking about it explicitly.
Yeah, it's
and then on the Sky Moves Sidways, it's like, yeah, it's space rock, and it's so much space rock, we're gonna have like samples of astronauts throughout the album. Which, like, I love that. Like it's super charming.
Yeah.
And it's fun, I love it. I like that it's not trying to.
It is fun.
Like, it's really good.
He's good at it.
It's really good music, so that's what's important. And then the fact that it has like these fun trappings on top of it, just like is icing on the cake for me. I love this early stuff for that reason.
I think Gong was the master of that. They did that kind of straightforward. Like on Radio Gnome Invisible 3, there's that track "You'll Blow Your Trip Forever." And it's like, I don't know, you hear the people laughing, which is like obviously people laughing when they're on acid or whatever. And those albums are really fun. Yeah, those yeah, exactly. Those albums are really funny. They're always fun to listen to for that reason, for the humorous quality. And I don't know to what extent that influenced these albums, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Any esoteric prog from the 70s you can think of, it's an influence on this stuff.
Yeah,
on Steve in general.
Yeah, and you guys know I love Gong, so yeah.
Like Pink Floyd is obviously an enormous influence on this early stuff, but also Gong, all the Kosmice music like Tangerine Dream and Klaus Schulze and Neu and Kraftwerk, all that. Hawkwind is a big influence. Alloy is a big influence, and I have absolutely no doubt that all those artists I just mentioned, Stephen was listening to it at this time and still does. So, Stephen is a gigantic music nerd and always has been. So, like any esoteric band you can think of, I'm sure he was listening to it when he was recording this stuff, which is awesome,
Yeah, I bet his LP collection is bigger than yours by like tenfold, maybe. Wouldn't be surprised.
More than that. I don't have that many records.
He did that video for Amoeba Records with like yeah, what's in my bag, and there's just like a wall behind him, and it's just all of his LPs and CDs and everything. And I somehow doubt that that's all of his records. So,
yeah, him and Mickey Ackerfeld, the two
Yeah.
ultimate music nerds
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, I always love when Michael Eckerfeld's like, yeah, Steven showed me this, and I just tell him I didn't like that, and he's like, Steven's like, oh, you're so wrong. He said that about Stormwatch by Jethro Tull. I remember he's like, have you listened to the 80s Jethro stuff? He goes, I don't listen to anything from the 80s Jethro stuff. He goes, oh, you're missing out. Actually, Michael Eckerfeld says Jethro Tull, which is great.
That's so beautiful.
So then he'll listen. Steven Wilson's like, you gotta
God
listen
damn
to
it, that is so beautiful.
I found a lot of music.
Not even
those
ironically.
two bros.
I found a lot of music through Steven Wilson. Dead Can Dance is one of them. Felt is another one. Both of which I guess. Well, I don't want to spoil anything, but raw beef. Yeah, that dude's just a quintessential music nerd, and I think he's a guy. Actually, I do give him credit for like all of the like stuff he's done that might be a little tacky later in his career. He's also been a positive influence, I think, on people who are like solitary, like all they listen to is progressive music, and he made it cool to like pop music and to like other genres, and people like that was something I think he was kind of like a gateway for people to find stuff they would. Oh, Steven Wilson likes ABBA. Well, that's pretty cool. I guess I can listen to ABBA then. I don't like that. That's how somebody filters it, but I think he's been a positive influence on the progressive scene in that way.
Oh, without question. The dude is very, very
I agree.
Is like very eclectic in his taste, and I think he does rub that off on the broader prog scene. So yeah, I give him huge credit for that, no doubt. Yeah, I'm very critical of a lot of his more recent work, but I do give him a lot of credit for that. I agree.
Yep. Although, Steven, if you ever come onto our podcast, I don't think your later stuff is tacky. I just said that to appease these other two guys who think it's tacky. Please talk to us.
Alright, Sky Moves Sideways. Let's get into like the real stuff.
I don't think we said anything about Up the Downstair at all.
We talked about.
I think that and Voyage 34 kind of bleed together.
They do in a way. I just the
piano riff on Synesthesia slaps.
The piano riff on Synesthesia, the chorus on that first little suite is excellent. And those, I guess the way Spotify has it, it's like that first suite. What do you listen to? Synesthesia or whatever, and then the title track I think are excellent, really excellent. I think Not Beautiful Anymore. Siren Small Fish kind of loses me a bit. It kind of bores me to a point, but then it picks back up with
it's a little bit front loaded.
I agree. So that's all.
And that intro is great. What you are listening to is musicians performing psychedelic music.
Well, under the influence of a drug called, and then the music comes in.
Yeah,
beautiful. It's great.
That is a fun way to introduce the album.
This is another example of samples being used. So we talked about this in the Bungle episode. We didn't know of any other bands in that vein who are using samples at this time. But yeah, Porcupine Tree was using samples, which is really interesting.
That's Wilson pulling from the electro scene.
Yep. To great effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Sky Moves Sideways. Or Wish You Were Here Late.
I just want to rush to talk about this because I fucking love the Sky Moves Sideways. Moonloop is bliss. Moonloop is just bliss. That's like some peak music for me. Like, I cannot be in a bad mood when that bass groove hits on Moonloop.
Yeah, and you know what's weird about it is the version you're listening to is like one of many versions that have been released on this album, I'm pretty sure. So there's been like the remaster, the US version. Like there's every release of this album had a different version of Moonloop, which I think is really interesting. And then I know that like Stars Die is not on every release. I don't think it was on the original UK release, but it was on the US release, and the track listing is different for all the releases, which I think is really interesting.
It's basically
I think the
standard first release is the one that I have. I think there might be a slight difference in the track listing, maybe, but it's basically the same. Basically, the tracks we're seeing on the screen now, the 6 tracks or 7.
There was a remaster where I think Gavin Harrison did the drums on the remastered version. Like they actually recorded the drums. And James, if you listen to this on Spotify, I think that's the version we probably listened to for this, was the remaster. So Yeah, as you can see in the track list here, we're looking at it doesn't have Stars Die, so that's probably reflecting the original UK release. That's something cool about this music too. Is like these albums have such weird structures to them, and which may not be like maybe that's just like I don't know. I really don't know how to, what explains that, but that's something that is always fun. Like there's so much additional music that you can find from this early era, which is just really fun archival kind of stuff and compilations and EPs and live recordings and jam sessions and everything like that. I think it's really fun.
Even though the band hadn't quite solidified yet at this point, I do think this is where other members start to really shine. Like Colin Edwin, as I already mentioned, shines hugely on the. Honestly, the bass playing on the Sky Moves Sidways is my favorite part of the whole album. I think Colin is like actually the star of this album, in my view. So
that's interesting.
Obviously, Steven's doing like a huge amount of work with the synths and the vocals and the guitar lines. Like he's the mastermind.
And Barbieri too.
Yeah, but like
Barbieri's huge.
Like
on this.
the groove, like the groove of the rhythm section is like very much highlighted on this album, and that's always my favorite part of it. Which isn't, I mean, like they're working as a unit. Even it's interesting that they weren't really a solidified band yet, because I do feel like they're working as a unit pretty well on here. And I mean, they're just jamming on Moon Loop. Like,
I agree. I totally agree.
It's basically a jam band track. And like, there's not a whole lot of that on the studio releases on it for any Swelson project. Maybe the IEM stuff and then Moon Loop, but it's really cool to hear like these, like Steven Wilson and the bandmates just jamming out. Would have been interesting if they would have continued in that direction. What it would have sounded like.
Dude, the transition in the first half of the Sky Moves Sideways, because it's broken up like Shine On You Crazy Diamond, where it's two long pieces of music at bookending the albums basically.
Yep.
And there's that like jarring moments, there's like all those instrumentals and whatever, and then it like that electronic part comes and the bass line just kicks in.
And then the vocal comes in. It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's like really jarring, but it works so well. Like it's just a really cool movement into that. I think it's masterful. I heard this one pretty early on when I got into Porcupine Tree. I think for most people who weren't following along with them when they were I don't know how many people were when this stuff was coming out, but it wouldn't be unlikely that if you started with In Absentia and Deadwing, you may have not heard this before, had given it any time. But this was one that I picked up on pretty early. It took me a little while to go back and get to the other stuff, but this was one that I don't know. I think I liked the album cover, which is really interesting.
I love this
awesome
album cover.
prog album
It's
cover.
extremely comfy.
Yeah. This is really nerdy, but it looks like I always think of Death Mountain in Ocarina of Time, like going up the side, like the you know what I'm talking about? That's what I was.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
Totally
And then
see
there's
that.
the thing
Going to
from
the fire
Doctor
temple?
Who. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or when you go up to a village or whatever.
If you turn that corner, it's you're gonna get boulders thrown at you.
Yeah, and then the Great Fairy Fountain is right up the top over here.
Yeah, exactly. I totally see that.
Yeah, I don't know. I always get that impression. I think that's what drew me to the album. But yeah, no, I think this one's on par with everything. Like, yeah, this is, I think, pretty close to.
This is some of their best material of the whole band's discography, in my view.
Yeah,
I love this shit.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, it's funny, Jake. You mentioned there that a lot of people probably haven't given this much time, and until a couple of years ago, that was definitely true of me. I assume I listened to this stuff at some point, just being a completionist when I first got interested in Porcupine Tree a long time ago. But up until a few years ago, I pretty much only thought of In Absentia and onward when I thought about Porcupine Tree. I got more interested in the psychedelic era stuff a couple of years ago when I was going back through my spreadsheet chronologically, and got back to Up the Downstair and this one. But I do wonder how many people just don't think about the psychedelic era of Porcupine Tree at all.
I think it's easy for people to see Porcupine Tree as a band that started in 2002.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Because those albums are such classics. I mean, like my favorite Porcupine Tree stuff is In Absentia and Deadwing.
This is absolutely a difficult thing to say, but if you're picking a short list for best prog albums of the 2000s, you can't make that list without like giving serious consideration to In Absentia and Deadwing, honestly.
And it's those albums are also so different from this stuff.
Yes.
The other thing about In Absentia and Deadwing is that those albums are pretty accessible. Like, you can throw those on in like a casual social situation and people are going to probably like it.
Yep.
Whereas the early stuff is deeper, like it's deeper, way out stuff.
I agree.
Not like the craziest stuff in the world or anything. It's not like highly avant-garde or anything, but it's definitely like way more niche. Like In Absentia is honestly like a pretty accessible album. Like, it's not deep prog at all. Like it like,
did well commercially.
It's the top of the iceberg for post 2000s prog. Whereas fucking The Sky Moves Sidways is way deeper in the iceberg.
I agree.
I wonder how much Radiohead had to do with that, with the OK Computer, and made that kind of. I mean, not the exact same thing going on, but
I don't understand the association of Porcupine Tree and Radiohead.
Steven took a huge amount of influence from Radiohead.
Yeah.
I'm sure he said as much in interviews.
He talks about it in his podcast. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
It's
even beyond that, like, I know I'm not the first person to make that comparison. They're obviously very like they're different enough. Like they're not carbon copies. Steven's not just doing what Tom York is doing or anything like that. But I know that Steven is very impressed with Tom York's catalog. And of course it's like these kind of like, I don't know, band leader British guys, kind of reclusive in a way. I don't know. Yeah, to me it's kind of similar. Well, and they're both like at the time doing that like Y2K paranoia kind of thing, which I think we get definitely on the next album. That's all over the next album.
Yeah, let's talk about Signify now. I mean, I fucking love The Sky Moves Sidways, but it's long form jamming music, so there's only so much one can verbally say about it.
Yeah, it's really minimalistic, and so it's one of those things where you can say a lot about it, but you just have to kind of sit down and listen to it because it's really long. A lot of it, the centerpiece album is really long. Yeah.
And then we have Signify.
This album, I think, is a masterpiece.
I can say with somewhat reasonable confidence, 90%, I'd say that this is probably my favorite Porcupine Tree album. Signify is beautiful. It's kind of hitting all the points of what makes Steven Wilson a good songwriter. It's pretty eclectic. It's transitional in a lot of ways. But like almost all of Steven Wilson's talents show up at some point on this thing, in my view. And the band in general, of course. Yeah,
you basically took the words out of my mouth. That's exactly what it is. I was going to say it's transitional, but I think we see... Definitely. I think we see, move towards what we're going to see on Stupid Dream, Lightbulb Sun, and Absentia. It's one of these albums, I think it's very cinematic. It seems to be, not that it's a concept album, but it's kind of linked thematically and conceptually in a lot of places. I think it's a much tighter composition, but we still get some of the psychedelic stuff, like Waiting, both of those phases. Some pretty trippy stuff going on there. But then we get songs like, there's like really brooding kind of like, I don't know. I see it in like I Drive the Hearse on The Incident, or maybe like what is this? Start of Something Beautiful, or like Dark Matter is the song I'm thinking of at the very end of the album.
Amazing
it's
closer.
Like this kind of longer track, and it's just like those really like gritty, down to earth lyrics without being ham-fisted, you know. And that's where I was saying that the kind of like thematic parts of it, where it's dealing with that, like how, I don't know, the millennium's coming to an end and grappling with kinds of issues and social issues that were going on at the time. I think it's really interesting. I don't know if Columbine had happened yet, but that seems to be, he's like alluding to that in that track with some of the lyrics and stuff.
This is an album that's very subtle, and one of my biggest criticisms of Steven, even on some of his like on work that I think is really good, is that he lacks subtlety sometimes, but he does not at all on here. Like a lot of his obsessions are showing up here, like depression, religion, like things that show up on a lot of his material are showing up here, but in a way that is kind of more artful and more subtle than what you're getting on, like, you know, a lot of the solo albums or the post In Absentia albums. I think there were like legitimately like really powerful emotional moments on here, like Sleep Without Dreaming. I think it's a crushing track in the best kind of way. Like Sleep Without Dreaming is a song that like illustrates depression better than a lot of his more explicit songs about depression later in his career. Not that I think it's problematic to be explicit about depression in music, but I think he does it better on Sleep Without Dreaming than he does on a song like Postcard. I think is a great song, but Sleep Without Dreaming might even illustrate depression better than Postcard does, but in a way more subtle way. So I'm always impressed with just like with this album, the cohesion of it, the emotional complexity of it. It's a pretty astonishing release.
We also get some of the I'm tired of Facebook on Every Home is Wired, but in a much more artful way, as you were just mentioning. Like that song's about, I don't know, it's like this is at the time where internet is like coming into the like public psyche, and so he's talking about that in that song.
Yeah, Every Home is Wired kind of has this like, yeah, definitely a Y2K technophobia to it that I think is kind of creepy in kind of a fun way, almost in a way that like I'm tired of Facebook is just cringe.
That line, man. Oof.
Yeah, and it's so weird. So it's so weird because you get that at the beginning. You get that like sample of the radio. I don't know if that was like originally recorded or if he pulled that. I'm sure he pulled it from something, but I'm not sure. It's a really cool way to introduce the album. But of course, there's obviously some like anti-religious themes in here. So yeah, just like to me, it's just what at the cultural zeitgeist. You have the Y2K like technophobia, the like satanic panic stuff, which you get on this album. It's a really like unnerving, creepy album. I feel like, and I love it for that reason.
Sever is an absolutely amazing track. One of the best choruses Stephen's ever written, and it's a really simple chorus. That's a strength of Stephen as a songwriter in general, is he can get a lot out of like pretty simple musical ideas, and that's all over here. And I think the chorus of Sever, I fucking love the chorus of Sever. And Sever is another like really, really depressing song in a really powerful and subtle way. Like you kind of have to pay attention to figure out the emotions that are working in Sever, but when you pay attention, like it's pretty crushing. Yeah, like I wouldn't want to speculate as to like how Stephen's like emotional state progressed in his life, but you can kind of see that like he's probably just like feeling differently around the time of this album, and obviously it just gets more intensely that way as his material continues, which is kind of sad to see, but he's channeling those feelings in like some of the best ways he ever did on here.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've always speculated about this, and James, I don't know if you recall, you and I talked about this one time about, I was like, you know, what happened to Steven Wilson for him to be able to like so perfectly encapsulate human sadness in this artistic medium? And I think you might have suggested this, maybe I suggested this, like maybe he's just really good at like illustrating those feelings or something like that. But I always suspected that. I mean, everyone feels sadness, like that's not surprising or anything like that. But and yeah, if he just has an artistic inclination. But you listen. What's so good about these albums is that they're so evocative. And that it makes you really feel like, even if it's not the case, if he's just, you know, a normal person with human emotions, and that's what he kind of channels that through the music, it does make you like worry about that guy. It's like, oh my god, he's like this just like bare sadness that's being displayed on these albums. And I think that speaks to how great they are in that respect.
Yeah, I mean that element of all of this stuff is so authentic. It's very true.
Yeah, when Steven is being emotional and like personal, he's great. It's when he tries to like take a broad view at society that he fails, but he's not doing that.
Yeah,
he's not doing that on this early stuff. Which is like he's basically sticking to what he's good at on this early stuff. And I respect him taking risks. He's always been a musician who takes risks and will continue to. So I respect that, even if it doesn't always pan out. But Signify is an album where he's playing to his strengths on every single moment of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I prefer it to Fear of a Blank Planet. I think I prefer it to... It's tough to say I prefer it to Deadwing. I probably do. I think I prefer it to Deadwing, and it's right up there with In Absentia for my favorite, I would say.
Signify, In Absentia, and Lightbulb Sun, I think, are my top three. Deadwing would be pushing close.
Yeah. I see you don't have a rating for Lightbulb Sun, James. You slacking on that one? should definitely listen to it if you haven't heard it yet.
I'm in the year 2000 on my spreadsheet right now, so
nice.
I just haven't listened to it since I started using it.
Yeah, that's an excellent one as well. Yeah, this is the point in his career, or for Porcupine Tree, I think it really just solidifies, and everything that he'd worked on in the early stuff comes to fruition. Though, yeah, I do think in a way it's kind of regrettable that this earlier... I mean, it was hard. It was kind of underground. Not many people knew about him. So it's understandable, but at the same time, it's. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he was doing in this early stuff, especially because a lot of it was just all him doing it. I think that's really, really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much freaking hype about In Absentia and Deadwing and Fear of a Blank Planet too. People who might not like the early Porcupine Tree probably really like that stuff.
Idiot Prayer is also amazing. One of the best instrumentals.
Yes.
It's almost post-rock. Like, I would kind of call Idiot Prayer post-rock, honestly. And it's fucking awesome. I think, like, Signify, as I already mentioned, is the first PT album that's, like, a cohesive band unit throughout the entirety of the record. And you can definitely hear that on Idiot Prayer. Like, they're playing together and the way that the samples are integrated, it's pretty devastating, like, the content of the samples. Fucking awesome track, Idiot Prayer. I don't know, like, is there an instrumental on Stupid Dream? If there is, we're gonna look fucking stupid. But I can't think of one immediately.
I don't think there is.
Is there another instrumental in post-Signify Porcupine Tree other than Wedding Nails?
There are some
track,
on,
but
there's some on The Incident for sure.
Yeah, but that's just part of, like, the suite, right? I wouldn't really count that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's one on Deadwing. I don't think there's one on Fear.
There's definitely not one on Fear. I wish there was.
Is there one on Deadwing? I don't think so.
But it's interesting how
So either.
I mean, the Sky Moves Sidways is almost entirely instrumental. Their vocals only show up on a couple moments on that thing. About probably, I don't know, maybe a third, maybe a little less than a third of Signify is instrumental. So that's one major shift that occurs after this album. Because Wedding Nails is the only Porcupine Tree instrumental I can immediately think of after this. And that's a totally different kind of instrumental than what we're hearing on here. So I do miss that. Like, even in like, obviously you have Bass Communion, there are no vocals in that, but that's like different than a song like Idiot Prayer. I do kind of miss that part of Stephen Wilson's musical persona, the jammy, band-focused instrumental music. I kind of would like to hear more of that.
There's definitely some of it on the 2010 solo stuff. Like
Sectarian is awesome. I forgot about that track. Yeah, Grace for Ground.
Oh, that comes to mind. Love You to Bits. Love You to Bits is instrumental in a lot of places.
Love You to Bits is a big throwback.
It's electronic dance.
Love You to Bits is a big throwback to this early Porcupine Tree in a really good way.
Yeah, definitely. And then, I mean, I guess, like, the Storm Corrosion stuff, I think, is instrumental with Michael Ackerfeld. So some of it is, right?
Yeah, that's true. It's,
So, there is some of it, but...
Steve Wilson is such, like, a prolific musician, and he has so many projects that I feel like the only way to really chart a through line is to, like, organize it all chronologically between all the projects, and that would be the only way to really chart a through line. And that would take a lot of work just to get the list together.
That's
but
true.
That's so in his favor, and I think.
Well, so yeah, it's Porcupine Tree. Then I mean, his solo stuff. Those are probably the most well known. And then No Man, Bass Communion, Storm Corrosion. What else does he do? What else is he on?
And Blackfield.
I Am.
And
Blackfield. Yes.
Blackfield too.
I love those.
There's
Blackfield
other
records.
stuff too. I'm sure there's some other stuff I can't even think of what it is.
He's also got shitloads of production.
Have you guys heard Blackfield 5? I think it was the most recent one.
I don't know the Blackfield stuff.
Some fun stuff on there. Oh, yeah, we need to do an episode on that. That's some good stuff. Not all, some of it's, yeah, but Blackfield 5 was excellent when that came out. That was one of my favorite albums that year.
been a long time since I've listened to any of the Blackfield stuff. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Well, and I think Porcupine Tree, maybe Steven Wilson in general. Anthony, you introduced this distinction. I think you said you had picked it up from somewhere else, but you introduced this distinction. Maybe it was last week in the last episode, but you'd mentioned that there's multiple ways to be progressive. Like instrumentally, it can be kind of technical, and then the other way it has to do with composition. I think Porcupine Tree is like a platonic essence of being progressive in terms of the composition.
Yeah, I watched this interview with Steven Wilson a long time ago. From like 2007. It was like right after Fear of Blank Planet came out. And, like the interviewer like really stupidly said like, "You guys are starting to sound like Dream Theater." And Steven Wilson, he was nice about it, but he was like, "Yeah, we don't sound anything like Dream Theater or nothing like Dream Theater. Our music is pretty simple. Like it's pretty easy to play."
Yeah,
and that's true. Like it's compositionally complicated, but not like instrumentally particularly complicated.
I learned the bass line to start as something beautiful. I was messing around with the bass back in like 2016, 2017, and I actually learned that bass line. So that's how simple it is. Some of the stuff is anyway.
Yeah, and like Halo. Like
if I can play it, it's pretty simple. I couldn't write it, but if I can play it,
I could probably learn how to play the drum part of Halo like in a few minutes if I had a drum kit. It's like as like basic 4/4 as it gets. The drum line of Halo, but it's awesome.
There's probably some Gavin Harrison subtlety in there. That's
but it's not. The point is, it's not a particularly complicated drum line, but it sounds great. It's not boring.
Well, speaking of bass lines and
that's Gavin Harrison's deal, man. He makes really, really difficult drumming sound.
Yeah, well, that's all over Pineapple Thief, and then of course he plays with King Crimson, right? So he has to be a pretty good drummer.
That's the opposite of simple drumming. What he does with King Crimson these days.
Oh, he's one of the best out.
He's playing
he's
in total cohesion with two other dudes. It's insane to watch.
That is a wild show, man. Speaking of great bass lines, though, waiting on this album when it kicks into like psychedelic part, do, and that bass line just like carries you through. Those bass lines, that's some of my favorite stuff about it. It's so simple, but it's so catchy and like grounds the rest of the music. And Sever, yeah, it just grounds the rest of the music, and it has this really trance-like quality. And it's, I don't know, I used to walk at night in grad school listening to this stuff. This is when I got into most of this stuff, I think. And yeah, it's really good music to walk to for that reason too. It kind of grounds you in a lot of ways. And weirdly, because even though it's psychedelic, it's I don't know, I always think of it as kind of earthly music too in that way. Maybe not on the Sunday of Life. There's some weird shit on there, but in a lot of ways. Definitely.
Do you still like definitively prefer In Absentia and Deadwing to the earlier stuff? No fault if you do.
I have so much more familiar. Yeah, I'm so much more familiar with that stuff than basically anything before then in this discography. This is stuff I've gotten to appreciate a lot more though in the last couple of years, just from having more exposure to it.
I mean, if you would have gotten into this early stuff in high school, you probably would have liked it. I don't really think this is stuff we would have not liked when we were kids.
No, I don't think so either. I don't think Up the Downstair would have done very much for me in high school. But I'd say Sky Moves Sideways and Onward. I still would have been interested in. I got so deep into the normie Porcupine Tree, like Deadwing and Absentia, that stuff. I just know it very, very well, and I've been listening to it for a long, long time.
It is quite similar to Pink Floyd in the career trajectory, which I don't think Wilson did that on purpose, but it is like astonishingly analogous to the way the discography progresses is insanely analogous to Pink Floyd.
It's true.
Yeah, seriously, geez,
it is really true.
No film soundtracks for Steven Wilson though.
Deadwing. Deadwing. At least parts of that. At least parts of that album were written for a movie.
It's definitely not a soundtrack.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
I don't think it's fully a soundtrack album, soundtrack album, but I do think it's at least some of the tracks, maybe more than I'm remembering.
Anyway, you want to rank these things? Kind of a tough batch to rank. Should we?
Yeah.
One question about the ranking. I'm sure you guys are going to want to do it one way, but I'll pose the question anyway. Should we have Voyage and Up the Downstair be separate or together in the ranking?
I'd say separate.
I think Steven consciously released them separately, so I think we should rank them separately.
Yeah, I knew you guys would want to do it that way. It's probably the better way, so I don't have a problem with that.
Well, it might not matter because for me they're going to be right next to each
too.
other and really hard to.
We'll probably basically consider them as separate we'll basically consider them as together in our rankings anyway.
Up the Downstairs is 1 and Voyage 34 is 5. That's the way to do it.
Based.
Yeah, I agree. This is hard, but
I can launch in. I'm ready to go.
Sure,
all right, go
guy.
for it.
5-1, 5-1. Sunday of Life, Voyage 34, Up the Downstair, Signified, Sky Moves Sideways.
I have the same ranking as James, except I would flip Signify and Sky Moves Sideways. Signify is easily my favorite of these, but Sky Moves Sideways also an all-time favorite of mine.
Yeah, 5-1 for me would be Sunday of Life, and then I would actually put Up the Downstair next. I'd put Voyage a little above Up the Downstair, and then I would go with Sky Moves Sideways and then Signify.
Yeah, Sky Moves Sideways and Signify are almost interchangeable for me.
But no shame in having Sky Moves Sideways at number 1. It's excellent.
I love that. I love that ambient style.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, there's no shame in that.
Loop is just too good.
I love that album. Yeah. Yeah, this stuff's really good, and I hope once we get our fan base, once the people start mobbing our podcast to listen to all our great wisdom. I definitely recommend people give this a shot if you've never done it. It's really good to contextualize the later stuff if you've heard the early to mid 2000s stuff, and there's a lot of great stuff in here.
For sure.
That's my pitch. Please listen to it. It's really good.
Yeah, faux show.